Okay, good morning everyone. Ready? Okay, I can feel the passion coming up to a new year. I thought looking at the weather today that it's maybe I'll get 3 people or something, but so I admire the dedication. Okay, today's the last one of this series and the last discussion before Rosh Hashanah. So let's just review first of all a little bit what we talked about last week. We talked about an important foundation about changing habits, the 3 things he discussed called outcome, process, and identity. So outcome is the thing we want to achieve, the process is the strategy, and the identity is who we are. And his point was, and it's a really good point, that we need to begin with identity. He gave a beautiful example, like if someone offers someone a cigarette and they're trying to quit, one person says, I'm trying to quit, the other person says, I'm not a smoker. In other words, you develop that identity, and then you put into place small changes. And we link that with the journey of Tishrei, the month of Tishrei, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, Sukkot. Rosh Hashanah really coming after the month of Elul is the time, especially with the shofar and the going to the essence of who we are, where we establish our identity. That's who we are. We have a soul. I said a little bit different the way it's in the book. In the book it talks about developing an identity. We don't have to develop an identity. We have one. We just have to expose it and connect to it. That soul identity, that godly identity that we all have, we reveal on Rosh Hashanah, and then we go into the plan of Yom Kippur, which is developing good habits and forming a change for the coming year. And of course that is step by step, small changes, small steps, as we've been talking about. And that's the Yom Kippur plan. And of course then then he spoke about the flip side of that as we continue to involve ourselves in behaviors, in action, the action then strengthens the identity. Okay. So today we're going to move into the strategy of how we actually form good habits or get rid of bad habits. But just to clarify something again, just to sort of reflect on something. So we're using the formula that James Clear uses in the book Atomic Habits. But the habits kind of what we're focusing on a little bit are a bit different. Connected. Most of the habits in the book are work habits, corporate habits, personal ambition habits like sports, like music, whatever the case is, which are all very good things, important things. But of course, at this time of the year, we looking at what I call value habits, right? So value habits are a bit different than I'm going to become an author habit or I'm going to become a musician habit. Value habits are habits that have to do with the moral compass that we follow, the convictions that we develop or learn about or we have when we go through life's journey. And in that area, also we have this idea of developing new habits, good habits, and getting rid of bad habits, right? Because as we know, we're born with a godly soul and an animal soul, as we've talked about so many times. And the animal soul intrinsically gives us some not such good habits that are based on egocentricity and ego and self-centeredness and self-absorption and self-pleasure and so on. So therefore we need to move away from those. And the godly soul, which is not always obvious and not always able to prevail, is the reminder that we have to then give the godly soul a bit of dominance and develop habits that are built on selflessness, built on spirituality, godliness, built on values, and so on. And that could be in in many areas. It could be in relationships, whether it's getting rid of toxicity, developing more tolerance, developing more respect, and so on. It can be in just our character, kindness, empathy, less anger, calmness, less jealousy, less hate, and so on. And then, of course, in the Jewish experience particularly, we have the world of action, which is doing things either between man and man, or doing things that are godly, like mitzvot, learning, and so on. Now, the difference between those value habits and concrete habits, the way he talks about in the book, the same strategy can be used, but just important to understand the difference, and that is, number one, they're not always so defined. So like if someone has, a goal, like I want to write a book or I want to play an instrument, it's a defined habit. When we talk about, I want to become kinder, I want to become more tolerant, it's different a little bit, right? So you have to kind of look for the specific defined behaviors that you're going to work on. So kind of the link between the goal and the habit is a little bit more vague. On the other hand, that's the challenge with value-based habits. That's why sometimes we don't always it's harder to sort of concretely make a plan and a strategy to be able to achieve those value habits. But on the flip side, value habits have a greatness to them, and that is that although he says in the book that with any habit you shouldn't focus on the outcome, you should focus on the small steps, but they're all outcome-based. Right? Okay, so I'm not focusing on getting to the Olympic prize. So I'm not focusing on finishing the book. I'm focusing on what I'm doing today, but at the end of the day, I'm working towards an outcome. With value-based habits, actually, we're not really working towards an outcome. I mean, there is a destination. There are with certain things, specific goals, but the goal itself, the outcome itself, is the growth. Right? That's what's so important with value-based habits. Each step becomes the goal. Now, although I talked about big goals a few weeks ago, and we do have to have that, we have to have a mission statement, and we have to work towards great ideals, but nevertheless, we have to also understand that each step becomes the goal, right? And that's why we have two opposite things. On the one hand, these habits are a bit harder to define. On the other hand, each step is just so much more valuable, and we have to celebrate that and really absorb that and understand that when we take one step, it's not one step towards an outcome, it's one step is the goal. One step is the success, right? Having said that, again, we can take a lot of the same strategies and apply them and use them in the journey of value-based habits as well. So, the series was only 3 weeks. I only got through chapter 2 last week, so there's the rest of the book, but it's a good read and an easy read. You can read it yourself, but I'm going to summarize the strategy that he uses, right? And let me just begin with this formula, and I'm just going to break it down a little bit, just pulling out some of the ideas in the book. So he says, to create a good habit, you need 4 steps. Number 1, make it obvious, make it attractive, make it easy, and make it satisfying. And then to break a bad habit, you just have to reverse that. And that is, make it invisible, make it unattractive, make it difficult, and make it unsatisfying. So let's understand what that means. And there's some really very basic and very effective strategies here. Making it obvious is the following. First of all, the principle behind this rule is like this: that the habits we have in life, good or bad, are responses to cues often. Things that happen around us, and we respond certain ways, and that's how we develop certain habits, right? So the first thing we have to develop is, in order to create the right environment and the right cues, is to become aware. Just awareness of how our day actually works. Now, he doesn't say this, but it's an interesting thing because most people actually are not aware. If you ask someone at the end of the day, like, how does your day look? Tell me the things of the day that affect you, right? I'm not sure people can actually answer that question because we don't stop and think enough, right? It's not really on topic, but he brings a nice little story in the beginning. I'll just share with you. He says, there was a woman who attended a family gathering, apparently. She had spent years working as a paramedic, and upon arriving at the event, she took one look at her father-in-law, and she became very concerned, and she said, "I don't like the way you look." So he said to her, he got a bit offended, obviously, he didn't understand what she meant. So he said to her, "Well, I don't like your looks either." So she got very serious. She said, no, you need to go to hospital now. Right? A few hours later, the man was undergoing life-saving surgery. After an examination, he had a blockage in the main artery, and et cetera, et cetera. So what was the story? The story is that when you get used to something and you understand something, you're able to pick up what to other people is not obvious, right? So she, studying as a paramedic, she had picked up certain signs of when arteries become blocked, and it wasn't obvious to everyone else, but she had become aware. Same idea is to reflect on our own habits and our own sort of routine, so that we become aware of which cues and which things that we do and which events happen in our life will bring about certain outcomes. Before we go further, sorry, I wanted to say something in the beginning. I want to dedicate today's learning for the neshama of Mandy's mother, who yesterday was the Shloshim, Chaya Bat Mendel, and her neshama should have an elevation, and the learning that we do should strengthen her neshama and in turn generate tremendous blessing for the whole family. Okay, so he says the following. He brings a beautiful research that took place in England, that they were working with 240, it's a very interesting thing, there's 248 people to build better exercise habits over the course of 2 weeks. So the first group was a group that just asked to track how often they exercised, right? So they knew they were part of a study about the effectiveness of exercise, and just they asked them to track how often they exercised. The second group, they called the motivation group, right? Not only did they ask them to track their workouts, but also to read material about the benefits of exercise and how important it is to exercise and how it prevents disease and so on and so on. And then there was the third group. And the third group received the same presentation as the second group. In other words, they also given material, but which means they had the same level of motivation because that was part of the study. However, they were also asked to formulate a plan for when and where they would exercise over the following week. Specifically, each member of the third group had to complete the following sentence. During the next week, I will partake in at least 20 minutes of vigorous exercise on, and they had to identify a day, identify a time, and identify a place. Right? So what happened is, in the first and second groups, 35 to 38% of people exercised at least once a week. Interesting that the presentation on material, how important exercise is, made very little difference. Right? But in the third group, 91% of the third group exercised at least once per week, more than double the normal rate, which is fascinating, right? Now, I just want to pause here for a second. What he's saying is absolutely correct. However, sometimes, it's always an over, right? Sometimes with value habits, like I don't want to undermine you, I think he's given motivation a bad rap, right? And I might be out of business, so I'm just going to clarify this very clearly, right? Studying and learning in the Jewish context is of utmost importance. First of all, it gives us a sense of who we are. But even in terms of changing a habit, I'll tell you why it's different. Because in a regular habit, it's different, but you still need the strategy of the third group, which we'll talk about in a moment. But often in Jewish-based habits or moral habits or value-based habits, learning is extremely important. Understanding the importance is extremely important. Why? Because when it comes to something like exercise, there's not a human being in the world that will argue that exercise is important. Everyone knows exercise is important. So that extra little bit of understanding, it doesn't often make that much of a difference. If you don't connect it with, it's important, but it doesn't make that much of a difference connecting it to actual application. When it comes to spiritual habits or moral-based habits or value-based habits, often we don't understand the value. See, values need understanding. For a value to become a value, and a value is a conviction, right? You need to understand why it's a conviction. And by default, we don't always understand, and not consciously. We know that deep down we have a soul, we understand, we have selflessness, we have values, but we don't know what they are necessarily, right? And part of It's not the only reason the Torah was given, but part of the God's system of giving us the Torah is to give us that moral compass. So we should be able to develop values in the first place. If you don't have the value, in other words, let's just work back in a second. In the third group, if they didn't believe if they didn't believe exercise was a value at all, then identifying a day and a time and a thing that you're going to, it wouldn't work. Even that wouldn't work. Because you have to have it as a value to begin with, right? I'm assuming that the people in the third group identified a day and a time and a place. They believed that exercise was important. They just didn't execute it properly. They didn't have a cue, like we're going to talk about in a moment. But if they didn't believe in exercise altogether, or didn't have it as a value, it wouldn't really help, right? So it sometimes is important to have that motivation, but it's not enough. In other words, we need to learn, we need to understand, and we need to re-understand, and we need to also practice the understanding. Part of the reason why motivational material doesn't work has another problem, because we've talked about this before, and that is Chachma, BINA, and Dat, right? You can understand and you can read material. You can understand the Chachma, you can understand the BINA, but you don't have the Dat. Dat means to actually connect to it, to actually internalize it, meditate on it, reflect on it, and really start to believe in it strongly, and then it does make a difference, right? Yeah, convincing? No. Okay, but nevertheless, the point here is to discuss that third part, which is really, really important. And that is linking your aspiration to change a habit to something tangible. So on Thursday morning at 9:20, I come to BINA, right? So that not like I'm going to learn more next year. You understand? Or like, for example, if I'll give you an interesting example. I'm sure it's not true with the BINA WhatsApps that you guys are subscribed to, but sometimes other WhatsApps. How many times you go on a WhatsApp group and you never read the WhatsApps, or you never listen to the WhatsApps, right? So I do the same thing. This looks so interesting. It's a weekly talk by some motivational thing. I'm going to subscribe to it. So I get it, and then I don't end up reading it, or I don't end up listening to it because I'm busy, right? That's okay. I mean, but if I really want to listen, the only way it's going to happen is if you make yourself a routine. If you link it, so even if it's a small thing, even if it takes 2 minutes, you got to link it. On Wednesday morning when I get up after my coffee, that's when I do it. Right? I'm going to listen to. I know it comes on a Wednesday 3 a.m. So Wednesday morning after my coffee or with my coffee, I'm going to listen to it. Now, not always is going to work because life takes us in different directions, but it's much, much more probable that it will actually work when you link it to a place, a time, what I'm going to do after something, and so on. Right. So that's it gives a whole bunch of examples. Like someone wants to start meditation, I'm going to meditation 1 minute at 7 a.m. in my kitchen or in my bedroom. If you want to learn a new language, you have to actually. So he advocates always starting with small steps. It could be 5 minutes, 2 minutes, but link those 2 minutes to a specific time and a specific plan, because in that cue, then that time and that place reminds you and motivates you to actually get it done. I think it's a very powerful thing, right? And also, he calls it stacking. In other words, also link it to a particular action. So, like, after I pour my cup of coffee, that's what I'm going to do, right? After I sit down to dinner, I'm going to say one thing I'm grateful for in that day, right? So if you say, every day I'm going to stop for a minute and I'm going to think of gratitude. I'm going to think of be positive. I want to think of 1 or 2 or 3 things that happened well that day, right? Which is a very powerful thing to do. But how many times we get busy with that day? We don't allot time to that, right? So that's quite a powerful thing. I'm going to make a routine. I'll pick something you obviously do every day, or most days at least. Like eat dinner. Most people don't forget to eat dinner. That's just the way it is. So then after dinner, I'm going to stop for 2 minutes and think of 2 things that happened well that day, or something like that. Very, very powerful. Okay, so that's now the same thing is with undoing bad habits, right? So, or just increasing just healthy lifestyle, for example. So, talks about like when if a person wants to Okay, that comes later. We'll talk about that example in a second. But things like, just like when something happens, this is what I'm going to do. So, for example, when I see a set of stairs, I'm going to take the stairs and not walk, right, and not take a lift. When I see something that's over a certain price, I'm trying to save money. I'm not going to buy it. I'm going to wait 24 hours until I buy it. You might rethink that kind of thing. Those things that you promise yourself that are manageable, that you do, but you link them with a particular thing, right? This one's a good one. Forgetfulness. When I leave a public place, I'm going to check the table and chairs to make sure I don't leave anything behind. Okay, that's a good thing. Then he talks about environment. Environment is a really, really important thing, right? So, obviously, if you have a habit, let's say a person needs to take a pill every night, just a simple example, and that's something it's very easy to forget. But if you leave it on your bedtime, you leave on your night table, and you put that bottle of water next to it, you're much, much more likely to remember, right? If you want to practice your guitar more frequently, you place your guitar in the middle of the living room. If you want to remember to send more thank you notes, keep a stack of stationery on your desk, all that kind of stuff, right? So environment makes a difference. Visual things, right? So time, space, linked to another activity, and environment. Things that you can see, things that are actually visual, right? And the same thing happens with undoing bad habits. So, like for example, if you want to go on the phone less, right? If you don't seem to get any work done, leave your phone in another room. So you don't have the temptation of looking at the email, looking at the WhatsApp, right? If you're continuously thinking like you're not enough, so stop following social media accounts that trigger jealousy and envy, right? Those kind of things, right? If a person wants to, this is an old thing, for example. If you want to eat less, you take the food out of the house, right? Don't leave 7 different types of delicious cakes in your kitchen and expect to have self-control and not eat them, right? If you wasted too much time watching television, take it out of the bedroom. All that kind of thing. So that's just the inversion. It's the other way around, right? So that's the first one. Make it obvious. So make the keeping the habit in a much more sort of obvious setting. Okay. The second rule, he says, is make it attractive. All right? Make it attractive. In other words, make it enticing. So let's say you do something that you really like, right? So you might say, it could work other way. You might say, well, as soon as I do that thing, I'm going to do something I need to do, right? Or turn it around. Say, before I do that, so before I have my coffee, I'm going to think of a gratitude thing, because in other words, in anticipation. So it's almost like a reward, right? You give yourself a reward, right? After I pull out my phone, I'm going to do 10 things that I need to do, and then I'm going to check my social media. So I'm going to send 10 very important messages to clients or to friends, whatever the case is, and only then I'm going to check my social media or check the news or whatever the case is, right? He says it's the anticipation of a reward, not the fulfillment, that gets us to take action. It actually works in the body. The what do they call it? The dopamine sort of endorphins and all these kind of things that happen in the body. The biological stuff is never my area of expertise, but whatever happens in your body happens. But it is that when you excited about something and you know that before you get to that thing, you need to do X, Y, and Z, you will do it quicker than if it's not connected to something that's there. Okay. Now, he also talks about the concept of culture, right? Like when you make something attractive, it also means, and this is a very interesting thing, and in Jewish sources, there's a lot about it as well, and that is making something attractive that you surround yourself by a culture of that thing. So in other words, you surround yourself with people who are like-minded, who have the same values or want to do the same habits. You have good friends that will remind you. Accountability is also a good thing. You share with a friend your habit that you want to do, and then sort of they hold you accountable. That they encourage you, they inspire you. So we have this concept, right? In Jewish thought, we have this idea of having a chaver tov and a shachen tov. This concept of good friends and good neighbors is a very, very important idea because they do have an incredible influence, right? In the Torah, there's a story of Korach. Korach led a rebellion against Moses, right? And the Torah tells us that with him came 250 people that belonged to the tribe of Reuven. You know, the Jewish people were divided into 12 tribes, and that's how they camped. And they camped in a certain way, and the tribe of Reuven got caught up. Why did they get caught up? Why the tribe of Reuven? Why? They weren't the worst tribe. I mean, they were all different people, right? Because just you look at the way the Jewish people camped in the desert, Reuven's tribe was right next to Korach's family, right? Because the Leviim, Korach was one of the Leviim families, the Levite families. The Levite families camped in 4 different groups, and then around them were the 12 tribes. It happened to be that Reuven was right next to Korach's family. So the Talmud says this phrase, Ola Rasha, Oli Shchenoi. Woe is to the wicked person, woe is to his neighbor. In other words, you know, you move in next to a wicked person, it's dangerous, right? And environment is a really, really important thing. Friends are a really, really important thing. When, on the positive side, when God told Abraham, he gave him the very, very first test, not the first test, the first mitzvah, to move from his place and to go to the land of Israel, he said, Lech lecha, go to yourself, go for yourself, ma'atzecha, from your land, from your family, and from your birthplace. Because all of these things are very powerful. If you want to grow, you're going to have to break. In terms of Abraham, his parents' home weren't the greatest home either. And therefore God was telling him, you need to break from those habits, you need to break from those environments if you truly want to grow. So that's another way of making a habit attractive. So first of all, it's about linking it to things that you like doing and disciplining yourself. You know, when I do this, I can do that, that kind of thing. And it's also making it attractive in the sense where you create an environment where it becomes easier and it becomes more attractive to engage in that particular habit. That could be a specific habit, it could be a value-based habit, whatever the case is, but when you're surrounded by like-minded people and people who are excited and passionate about doing the same thing you want to be able to do or you want to be able to start doing, it becomes much, much easier. Now, just to remind ourselves, however, that while it is all true, right? But in Judaism, and in particular the value-based habits, we have this because it doesn't always work, right? We're not always in an environment where that works. So we know that in Judaism we have a principle that, notwithstanding that it is true that we are very, very much influenced by people around us and by upbringing and by environment and like-minded people and so on and so forth, but we're certainly not bound by it. We should never ever think that we can't do something because we couldn't create that culture, right? That's just such a fundamental principle. In fact, it also goes back to Avraham Avinu. Avraham Avinu, when he started believing in God, he actually wasn't in the right culture. We have this phrase that's brought in the Talmud, Echad Haya Avraham, that Avraham was one, he was singular, he was solo, he was fighting. In fact, he took on the entire world. It was an incredible, when Avraham lived, the world had become completely, or the civilized world at that time, had become completely steeped in pagan worship and in serving idols and so on and so forth. And Abraham, as a very young person, had to fight an entire society. And that's what he did. He did. Then God made it easy for him and said, time to move to somewhere else. But a different land. But that's the way he started off. And that's the DNA. That's the DNA of what we have. We take responsibility for ourselves. We never blame the environment. However, it's not a mitzvah to make it difficult for ourselves. We can make it easier for ourselves by picking the right environment and the right friends and the right culture and so on and so forth. But we always have to remember that we're not bound by any of that, right? The real strength that we have is to do what's right no matter what the environment is or no matter what the influences are. And I say that particularly nowadays because today we live in a world that's influences are very strong. Very, very strong. We have very strong influences. And they're not specific to environments. That's the problem. They're traveling through the phone. And you can be in any environment at any time, whenever you want, right? For the good and for the bad. You have to go to the right website. And link into the right Instagram account, or whatever the case is, right? But so therefore we're it's for good and for bad. We can connect to really good things, but also often the things that are very influential on us, that are distracting and actually distorted, value-wise, come whether we want them or we don't want them. And we have to remember that while it's good to make a habit attractive, but we have to also believe in our ability to withstand that pressure, that social pressure, that environmental pressure, and to overcome that. There's a very interesting halachic piece in the Talmud, which is often used to demonstrate this point. In the laws of kashrut, there's an idea called treifa, which is that even with kosher animals or kosher birds, which have to be slaughtered and shechted in the correct way, but if they have a disease that would cause them to die soon, then actually they're not kosher, right? That's just an interesting thing. I mean, I'm not going to go through the laws of kosher animals now, but I'll give you one example. Like there are certain common ones, for example, when they shecht animals today, cows or whatever the case is, there's certain bidikot, there's certain checks they have to do afterwards. Like they have to check the lung, for example. They find a hole in the lung, and although they've shechted the animal properly, the animal's not kosher. They give it away to the non-kosher market, right? Because it's considered treifa. And the Talmud says there's a certain bird, a duck or something, like a bird that's in the water, that if it contracts a certain disease and you're not sure if it's a treifa or not, you're not sure, you're aware of it while they're still alive, but you're not sure if this bird is considered kosher or not, if you can shecht it in order to eat it, you need to put it into like a little river and see if it can swim against the stream. If it can only swim with the stream, then it means they're too weak, and they're obviously going to die soon, and therefore that's not a kosher bird. However, if the bird can swim upstream against the stream, it's a kosher bird, right? So that's often brought to use as an idea. But if you want to be really kosher, in other words, if you want to reveal your own true strength actually comes sometimes when you can demonstrate that you can swim against the stream, right? Having said that, the strategy is good. As we grow and as we take on new habits, it is a good idea to try and make it attractive, but not to depend on that. The third strategy he brings is making it easy, right? Making it easy. As he said in the beginning of the book, the most effective form of learning is practice, not planning. It's making sure that we use bite sizes, that we take small things, right? We take steps that are easy to do, but we dedicate ourselves to doing them. So we link it with a cue, we link it with a time, a space, and so on. But we take small steps that we can repeat, and then we can keep doing. Because as we keep doing it, it strengthens it and it makes it permanent, right? It makes it last. And he talks about the 2-minute rule. Like if you want to take on a new thing, take on the 2-minute rule. You break it down into different tasks, which are very, very short. For example, a person wants to read before bed each night. They're not such a good reader. They really want to develop that habit, so just make it up, don't say read a chapter. Read 1 page. Start with 1 page. Do 10 minutes of or whatever the case is. All that kind of stuff. But we know that we also have we have a very low threshold of things that we can do sometimes. Therefore, it's really important to be able to choose those things correctly, and just source short bite sizes. I forgot what I was going to say before. Yes. Now, we all have a tendency sometimes to procrastinate. I think, especially things that we don't like doing, even though we want to do them. Right. So this is a really, really good strategy for procrastination as well. I once learned a very, very long time ago with someone he called it the salami method. He calls it the 2-minute rule, or he calls it the 1-page thing, whatever the case is, right? But the strategy really is to just set yourself very small goals. Break it up. So, for example, if you have a filing cabinet, I mean, it's not even to do with the habit, it's just to do with things that are important to get done. If you have a filing cabinet that's complete a mess and you really need to sort it out, right? You need to make it organized, sort it out, put things in the right place, and there's like 45 files over there that you really need to go through. So you put it off, right? The best way to do it is I'm not going to do a lot. I'm going to do 2 files today. I wake up in the morning and do 2 files. Now the effect of that is, number one, we get it done, and if we do it every day, eventually we'll get there. And what often happens is different actually, because there's even a phrase, and I think it's Pirkei Avot or somewhere, where it says Kol hatchalot kashot. When we do something, we don't know, when we do it and we feel accomplished, it's satisfying. But when we don't do it, it just seems hard to do, right? So the beginning of everything is hard. The beginning of every process is hard. That's how it works. What often happens is that when you start, you say, I'm going to do 5 minutes of cleaning my study, or I'm going to sort 2 files out today, and you do it, suddenly you get a bit of they call it Yiddish a geschmack, like you start to enjoy it, and you end up doing more, right? Because like success brings success. So you did it and it was good and you feel good about it, you do 2 more. Not always that works. Sometimes you just have to break things up. I use this method like just for certain things. I'll just give you an example. Like there's certain thing of study that I do every day because just a tradition that we have to study a chapter or 3 chapters of Rambam every day, right? Now, I have to be honest, Rambam is not my favorite study. I mean, the concepts of Rambam are amazing, but the Rambam's Mishneh Torah is it was written to be dry facts. Like, he doesn't bring reasons, he doesn't bring analysis. The Rambam took all the laws of the Talmud and he codified them in 14 books, and they're just facts. They're fact after fact after fact after fact, right? Of different halachot, different laws and so on. But the Lubavitch Rebbe was very into learning Rambam every day. He instituted this program of learning Rambam every day, 2 systems, either 1 chapter a day or 3 chapters a day, where you can finish it in 1 year or in 3 years, whatever the case is. And he was very insistent for those that followed him that they should do that, and he explained all the reasons. So it's okay. We learn to do things that we don't like doing. That's part of Judaism, as we'll talk about in a second. But so I do it. I do it every day, right? Because I'm a follower and I do it. It's not one of the things I particularly enjoy. But I mean, because everyone learns different things and enjoys different things. But the way I do it is, like, let's say a chapter's got 35 laws. It's there, Aleph, Bet, Gimel, Dalet, Hey, right? I'll start to say, okay, now I'm just going to do 1 to 5. That's my focus. I'm just 1 to 5. And then I finish, then I'll make a plan. Okay, now 5 to 10. So it's amazing how it works, because it's actually completely psychological. Because I actually know, in this case, it's not like the filing cabinet. In this case, actually, I have to finish all 35 laws today, because tomorrow starts a new chapter, right? So it's just in my mind. When I break it up like that, it seems to work really well. So this is another thing. Okay. And the last habit he talks about make it satisfying. Right? Because he says we're more likely to repeat something and to continue doing it when the experience is satisfying. So in other words, I mean, and I think for everyone that will be different. It could be, treating yourself. It could be like celebrating the success. It could be making the experience more exciting, more satisfying, more meaningful. Maybe it's about doing it with other people so that you can celebrate together. You exercise, you do it with other people so you can go out for a coffee afterwards and socialize. It's just about making the experience. In value-based things, often it means learning about it. I mean, it could be a mitzvah. Some people often tell me they, have taken upon themselves a new mitzvah, but they don't get any value out of it. It's not satisfying. So we need to make it satisfying. You need to learn about it. Maybe do it in a way with other people. Maybe do it in the right environment. Maybe learn the meaning and the depth behind it, so that when you do it, it's got so much more meaning and you relate to it, right? That could be with davening, for example. Davening for some people is just praying is a very boring exercise. Now, it's designed to be that, by the way. It's for another discussion. The Zohar says that prayer is a time of war. It's not an easy thing, prayer, but we don't have to dafka make it hard. So that's it. So prayer can become a meaningful if you know what's going on, if you learn about it before, if you understand the commitment, you understand what's happening. Or, we learn about it, we enjoy it, we make it. There's different ways to make something satisfying, but we could make it satisfying. And he ends off by saying, he says, the first 3 laws of behavior change, which is make it obvious, as we said, make it attractive, make it easy, increases the odds that a behavior will be performed this time. The 4th law of behavior change, make it satisfying, increases the odds that a behavior will be repeated next time. Okay? Now, those are the 4 rules in very big summary. I suggest you read the book properly and get the proper rundown. However, I want to add something. So for the last 50 minutes, I want to just first add something to what we just talked about, and then just link it all to the coming into the new year and changing and going into a new, fresh, blessed year, hopefully. So this idea of making something meaningful and making it easy and making it attractive and making it enjoyable, all of these things are true and are very important. From a Jewish point of view, and especially when it's value-based habits, right? Sometimes, and we've talked about this before, but it's a very important thing to understand. Sometimes the meaning behind something is that you don't enjoy it. Now, I'm not suggesting that you look for not enjoying something, right? And by the way, this is very connected to Rosh Hashanah, one of the themes of Rosh Hashanah at least, because Rosh Hashanah is when we crown God as king, And one of the ideas brought in Kabbalah is the idea of Kabbalat Ol Malchut Shamayim, which means we surrender to God as the authority. We surrender to Him with the understanding that it's the most amazing gift to go beyond ourselves and to connect to His infinity and to connect to Him, which is so much infinitely higher and greater than us. But there's a value of connecting in a way where we don't understand, or it doesn't talk to us, and it's not enjoyable. And yet, we can still do it with joy. The previous Rebbe's father, known as Rebbe Rashab, said, when he talked about Rosh Hashanah, he said, Kabbalas oil, which means accepting upon God's sovereignty and His mitzvot and His values and so on, is what we call in Yiddish a yoch. A yoch means it's a load. When you've got a burden, a load. But he said a geschmacke yoch. It's a pleasurable burden, right? And I think someone gave the analogy once of someone carrying a very, very heavy sack up a mountain. When you carry a heavy sack up the mountain, it's hard. It's very hard. You schwitz, you work hard, right? But it all depends what's in the sack. If you're carrying a bag of stones, then it's just hard. If you're carrying a bag of precious stones, it's still hard. That's the point. It's still hard. But you're aware of its value, so you're more excited about it. In other words, you can be excited about something that is hard. That's what I'm trying to say, right? And this goes back to the intrinsic principle that we have in Judaism, that when God gave the Torah, He separated between two kinds of mitzvot, the chukim and the mishpatim. There's mitzvot in the Torah that don't make any sense, and we don't have a reason for, and maybe there's some esoteric reason which is beyond us, but for all intents and purposes, whatever that means, there's no reason. We don't know the reason. And then there are many mitzvot in the Torah that have a reason. Either because they're logical, like not to steal, we know that in order to have a society, there's certain things, moral codes you have to follow, or not moral codes, but they just mitzvot, but we know the reason. We know we eat matzah on Pesach because God said when the Jews left Egypt and didn't rise, and matzah represents selflessness and all this kind of stuff. But there exists a part of the Torah where we are told to do things that we don't understand. Now, the obvious question is, why couldn't, if He gives us a reason for some of the mitzvot, why couldn't He just provide the reason for the mitzvot? And the reason is because there's value in surrender. And there's value in doing things that don't make sense. The value of that is, and the attractiveness of that is, and the inspiration of that is, that we understand our limitation, and we understand that we need to grow, and we understand that we are so finite that we have to move into and connect to something that is higher than us. Right? That is a concept. Now, so why do you do that with all the mitzvot? Because there's value in knowing. They both have value. And they're both there. And they both have to exist in everything that we do. So of course, God wants us to serve Him with our passion and our excitement and our enjoyment and our brain and our heart as well. So that's why with a lot of the mitzvot, He gave us the reasons, and He gave us the exciting explanations, and He gave us the inspiration and so on. But He also wanted us to understand that it's not all about me. It's not all about us. It's about going beyond us. And in order to go beyond us, we have to learn the art, and we have to believe that we have the art, we have the skill of doing something that's hard. Or simply put, we have the capacity sometimes to be uncomfortable. In other words, all the strategies in the book are fantastic strategies, but they could lead a person to say, I'm only going to do something when I've achieved all those strategies. Now, I'm only going to do it when it's satisfying, when it's attractive, when it's easy, all those kind of things. Now, they're all good things, and we all need to, and they really are good. But this is the point. Sometimes the satisfaction is to do something that is hard, that is uncomfortable, that we don't understand, but we know that it's a bag of diamonds, because we know that with that we're connecting to God, and we're connecting something that is so much higher than us. At the end of the month of Tishrei, there's a festival of Sukkot, right? We have Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, and Sukkot. In temple times, nowadays also Sukkot is considered the time of great joy. It's the most festive out of the three festivals, or out of all five festivals. Out of Pesach, Shavuot, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, Sukkot, and Pesach, right? Sukkot is the most festive, Sukkot and Simchat Torah. One of the festivities that used to take place in the temple many, many centuries ago was this idea called Nisuch HaMayim. Every day when they would bring sacrifices in the temple, there was a libation that went with the sacrifice. After the sacrifice was complete, they would pour some wine on the altar, right? That was the thing that happened every day of the year. On Sukkot, there was an interesting mitzvah to pour water. Pour water. Where would they take the water? Today you can make it very visual, and very tangible. If you go to Ir David, you can. The first I went there, I was just like completely blown away. There's a spring there called the Shiloach spring, connected to the waters of Gihon, which you can see it all now in Ir David. Right? The water's still there, not the same water. I mean, the spring is still there from over 2,000, from 2,000, 3,000 years ago. It's amazing. And you see the spot, and you see the Temple Mount. And when I went there the first time, I'd learned this so many times in the Talmud, but to actually visualize it, what they would do is they would, in the temple every night. This was done in the morning. They would dance the whole night. It was the most amazing celebration. It would take place every night in the temple Sukkot. Men and women would all come and they would watch them, and the great rabbis would juggle with fire. It was like incredible. Why did they rejoice? Because the verse says, "Ush'afte mayim b'sason." When you draw water, you should draw water with joy. So they would dance all night, and then when it came dawn time, they would all walk down from the Temple Mount down to Ir David. As I say, you can track the path today, and they would draw water, and then they would take it back from the temple, and then they would go through the ritual of pouring the water on the altar, right? And the obvious question is, if you asked me what brings more joy, water or wine, wine wins, right? Yeah. So here we pour wine the whole, we pour wine, or something like wine, right? You don't say good l'chaim on water, I mean, right? So here the whole year, they pour wine every single day on the altar, but there's not this massive celebration. What's the celebration? Pouring water. Why? So in Kabbalah and in Hasidic philosophy explains like this. Because actually water is the ultimate joy. Wine is the obvious joy. Wine has a taste. It's something you enjoy. Something that talks to you. It's like the mishpatim. It's like the mitzvot that have a reason. So yes, it's enjoyable. We start with joy. It brings real joy. Water has no taste. What does it represent? It represents surrender. It represents doing something that has no taste. And what we need to understand is that sometimes when we do something that has no taste, that we don't understand why, and it's difficult, that's the real joy. Because we've gone beyond ourselves, and there's nothing more to celebrate than going beyond ourselves. And that's the power of the water. So, I think particularly this year, Rosh Hashanah, as we've talked about before, we're going into a year after a very difficult year. We're going into a year where our Judaism has been attacked. The conscious Judaism, the obvious Judaism. Now we have to go to the deep Judaism. We have to go to our deep soul, as we've talked about before. We have to connect very deeply to who we are and the habits that brings. And I think it's all the more important than ever before to take something as we go into the year. Take something tangible. We talked about habits in the last 3 weeks. Take something that actually is tangible. It might be hard, might be a little bit hard, but we can use these strategies. We can make a plan. We can make it work. But we really need to upgrade and connect deeper. And even if it's something that we don't really understand, or even it's something that is a little bit hard for us, we can do it. We can have the joy of water. And I want to just end with two things. First of all, one is just connected to habits and sustainable habits in the series. Something I've said many times, but I'll just repeat it because it's such a beautiful idea that I once saw about apple and honey. Because apple and honey is really all about making habits that last and work. Because we come to a new year, Rosh Hashanah, so we have the apple and the honey. Why apple and honey? Besides a sweet year. Because apple is a beautiful and delicious fruit, but it has a very short shelf life. If you leave an apple on the shelf, it's going to become rotten in a few days. Honey, on the other hand, is a preservative. Honey can has a shelf life forever. Well, just about, right? So, and people used to preserve things in honey. So when it comes to Rosh Hashanah, hopefully we're going to be inspired. Hopefully we are inspired. Hopefully we spent an Elul, and we prepared, and we focused, and we've thought about it. We've said more Tehillim, we've done more. We all tried in our own way. We all tried to do. But we all have a way to go. We all have stuff that we can still work on. We all have to take something on. But we get excited on Rosh Hashanah, and we maybe commit to something. But then, you know how New Year's resolution works, right? They don't always last. It's like an apple. It's delicious. It's amazing. It's exciting. But then after a few days, it's no longer there. So what do? We dip the apple into the honey. We say that we're in apple mode now, but we want to dip it into honey because we want it to last. How does it last? We'll take some of those strategies we've learned. We'll make it attractive. We'll make it easy. Even if it's difficult, we'll celebrate it. And the meaning and the satisfying aspect of it will come from the fact that we're working hard. All that stuff is true. We dip the apple in the honey, and it'll work. It'll be permanent. And I'm just going to end off with one story that I just read recently that Rav Rimon, I quoted him a few weeks ago, he was here, and he's very, very involved in the war, and visits soldiers every single day, and it's really a special time. He told such an amazing story, and I wanted to share it with you before we go. This is the last session we had before Rosh Hashanah. And he said that, I don't know if you know, there's been crazy things happening in Gaza, I mean, from a spiritual point of view, right? Shabbat meals and shiurim and learning Talmud. I mean, the stuff that's been going on in Gaza is unbelievable. One of the things that happened one day was a Siyum Sefer Torah. They ended and dedicated a new Sefer Torah in Gaza. Because they set up makeshift shuls there and stuff like that, some of these soldiers. That's unbelievable. Anyway, so what do you do by a Siyum Sefer Torah? It was obviously a day that they weren't doing missions. You end the Sefer Torah, and then you dance. You dance like Simchat Torah. And if you ever went to a celebration of a completion of a Torah, it's the most amazing event. They do like hakafot, like a Simchat Torah. And one soldier, an observant soldier, got up and he made the statement. He's in the middle of the dancing. He got up and it was quiet, and he said, "This past Simchat Torah," because in Israel, when October 7th happened last year, over here we call it Shmini Atzeret. But for them, it's also Simchat Torah. We do Simchat Torah the next day. But he said, last Simchat Torah was pulled away and I wasn't able to dance. He said, today, I am dancing. And therefore, he says, the circle has been completed. That's what he said. Right when he said that, a completely non-observant soldier got up and said, the circle has not been completed. And for a moment, it was very awkward. People thought maybe he's like challenging, he's being anti, he's like, it's like, why now? Why are you doing this? But he continued his talk. He said, last Simchat Torah, I didn't dance either. Not because of the war, because I've never danced Simchat Torah. He said, today, I am dancing. And the circle has not been completed. The circle has just begun. And I'm sharing with that story, and I'm linking it to what we've spoken about, and I'll leave you with this thought. And this applies to everyone, not nothing to do with observant, not observant. We all have things that we haven't done. We all have things that we need to grow in. When I say we, I mean we, me included. Even though I have a white beard and all that kind of stuff, but that doesn't mean much. It just means that...
Forgot to shave.
Yeah, of course. Right. We all have things we have to grow in, and we all have things we could, and all have mitzvot we need to take on. We all have things that we could do. We all have a circle that hasn't yet begun. And I just think, on Rosh Hashanah we have circles. We have round chalot, right? Yeah. We all have a circle that's not closing. We all have a circle that needs to begin. I just think, and I don't know how to bring this out passionately enough, but I just think that this is a Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur and Sukkot where we have to look for a habit like never before. We have to really engage in something like we've never done. It's been an incredible year on a negative way. It's been an incredible year in a good way. Things we've seen and the things we are seeing now are unbelievable. The miracles we've seen, the blessings we've seen, together with the tragedy and the heartbreak, both things are true. They're all true. But it's not over, and you all know what's happening now, and there could be a whole nother war heating up and all this kind of stuff. I don't think it's in our lifetime at least, I'm not talking about previous generation. In our lifetime, there's never been a more important time to connect to our Jewishness. So I encourage myself, and I will do this, please God, and I encourage everyone, let's think of something that we can do that we haven't done. Even a small step, but maybe it's a little bit difficult, but let's think of something that we could do. If you want to talk it over and suggest something, I'm happy to do that, but let's think of something, and let's not close a circle, but let's begin a circle. On that note, let me just wish you all, we will do our best, but I'm sure God's going to not wait for us, and He's going to bless us with an amazing year. And we have emunah, we have trust, we have belief. We don't understand the things that happened the past year, but we also have positive emunah and deep emunah. The coming year will bring only blessings. Shana tova to you, to your families, to Am Yisrael, and to Eretz Yisrael. And don't forget all the things that are happening over the next few weeks. I'm just finishing the series, I'm not saying goodbye. Don't forget Sukkot, those want to come second day, Rosh Hashanah, and so on. Sorry? No. Next week's Rosh Hashanah, Thursday. No, between Rosh Hashanah, no.